Fairview, I think, again. Is that what's in order? I think it is. It's hard for me to keep track. Here we go. All right. Every week there's something with Fairview. Last week, Fairview had filed an appeal with the Zoning Board of Adjustments to look at the 5-2 vote that passed the Fairview to LDS Temple, right? They said there were some irregularities there, and instead a supermajority was needed. So since then, and I was really excited, I got to break the news on Mormonish. We had an episode where we talked to the lawyer of the Fairview United group. Since then, they have now filed an actual lawsuit in district court over the same issue. And as everybody says, the residents of Fairview and the people on the town council, this is not about the LDS Temple. This is about procedures in the town. Legality, yes or no, but it could affect the LDS Temple, if that makes sense. So today we're going to talk a little bit about this lawsuit that has now been filed in district court. There's a lot of information. RFM's going to chime in here at the end, but I wanted to I finally have an awesome map. Fairview United put this out, and I think this will help us understand what we're talking about. Prior to the vote of the town council to pass or not pass the conditional use permit, granting a variance so they can build the temple, the residents in the Fairview United group had registered and logged letters of protest. Now, if 20% of the residents, I've said this over and over, you guys can probably quote me, based on land area, are not okay with this, it takes a supermajority of the town council, meaning 6 out of the 7 votes, 6-1. They didn't get that. They said this is passed at 5-2. And this is where the whole question lies. So how do you protest and how do you calculate this? Well, you take the land that the church is going to build the temple on. That's right in the middle, the white area right there. And then you go out 200 feet, right? And everybody who owns land within that area supposedly is able to log their, reaction, yes or no to what's going to be built. So this says right here, this section shows 3 color-coded protest zones extending 200 feet out from the subject's property, the land where the LDS church is going to build. So the green zone, that's the biggest zone right there that you can see. Northwest and east sides of the property, you can see that all of it is within the town of Fairview. Everything green there is in the city limits of Fairview. And these landowners can legally protest, meaning they can write those letters. They can say, I don't think this is a good project for my town. They can do that. And they can, the land counts toward the 20% threshold that triggers the need for a vote. So, it's a huge calculation based on this 200-foot protest zone that anybody in this green zone that writes a letter to the city and logs it prior to that original meeting, they're counted in that 20% because we're trying to reach that threshold to trigger a supermajority.
Rebecca, okay. Hey, I don't mean to throw you off here at this point, but in their written objection, do they have to do something to notify the city that they live in that zone?
Yeah, the city had to have notified them about the ability they have to weigh in on this issue.
And the city did that.
And the city did that. Yeah. Okay. And we'll find out where they didn't do that in a minute here. So yes, you would have received a letter if you lived in this green zone that said, hey, there's this issue. You have till this time to log your response. Do you want to say yes? Do you want to say no? Do you want to not respond at all? If you don't respond at all, you're kind of counted as a yes because you're not protesting. You're not disagreeing. So you're, kind of a non.
Are you counted as a yes or just not counted? Because those are two different things, right?
Yeah, I'm calling it yes, meaning that it's a non-no, if that makes sense. You're definitely not part of the 20% that is protesting if you do not log any response.
Right.
So in my simplistic way of thinking about it, you're okay with it. You're counted as being all right with it. So, okay, did I switch this? Okay, so zone 2, here we go. This is this little orange area at the bottom of the green zone. This is directly south of the church's property, which again is this big white square. And it's along Stacy Road. That's that little red line going parallel there. And this is also within Fairview. If you live there, you also can be counted. And these owners' land, and again, we're going off land area, can also count toward the protest threshold, that threshold of 20%. Okay, so here's where it gets confusing. And here is where, did I switch it or not? Yes, zone 3, the red zone. Oh my goodness. Okay, the red zone you can see there at the very bottom of the map. This is south of Stacy Road. This is on the other side of Stacy Road. I feel like I know Fairview geography better than like my own town, even though I've never been there. I spent so much time talking about it. I bet all of you do too. So red zone, south of Stacy Road, and it is in the city of Allen. In the red zone, this is not Fairview. This is the city of Allen. I mean, they're right there across the street from each other. I live in a place like that where it's right across the street. I'm sure a lot of you probably do too. It's pretty common.
So, Rebecca, I'm so sorry. Is the yellow/orange, the yellow zone there that was on the previous slide, that's just a road? That's just Stacy Road?
No, Stacy Road is the red. And that's the other question too. How do you count the area of a road? Is that a yes or a no? You know, all these things kind of weigh in. So
I think that's a wash.
Yeah. And it's very complex. There was another map where they really had it laid out with the square footage and all that. I did not want to show that. I'm trying to give kind of a simplistic explanation of how this all works. But yeah, as far as what they're presenting in court or in these appeals and the lawsuit, it's really complicated, and they've really measured everything out. So in this red zone, this is the city of Allen. So these properties do not qualify under the Texas protest rules for Fairview zoning changes because they're in another town. They're not even in Fairview. They're not part of this. The town improperly included this zone to inflate the total land area, making the percentage of protesting landowners seem smaller. So the people who lived in the red did not need to be notified. They did not.
Were they notified?
They were not notified because they did not need to be notified because they are not on the tax rolls of Fairview.
Right, because they're in a different
weigh
town.
in. Yeah, but they can't weigh in.
But they still counted their property as part of the total.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And that's exactly, very simplistically, what the residents are saying. These landowners, whether they wanted the temple or not, they didn't even have any leg to stand on in the town because they're not on the tax rolls. They're not members of the town of Fairview. Okay. So they go on to say that the key issue that the plaintiffs, that's Fairview United, which again is FU, Fairview United argued that Zone 3 should be excluded from the protest area because the Allen landowners, the town of Allen, they aren't taxed by Fairview. They don't pay taxes to Fairview. They weren't entitled to any notice, and they were not given any notice. They had no idea this was even happening, that there was a line being drawn around their properties, and they aren't allowed to protest zoning in Fairview. So they have no standing anywhere in Fairview, yet the square footage of their property has been able to say its piece, if that makes sense. And this is what the Fairview United residents are saying is not correct. So in summary, the map proves that too much land was wrongly included in the protest area calculation. Specifically, they're talking about Allen property. And of course, when you have too much land included, that dilutes that 20% that they're trying to arrive at, because these Allen residents are a non-entity, yet their property has been counted. Once corrected, the protests meet the legal threshold for a supermajority vote. So they're saying if you calculate it without the Allen property, and like you said, there are some issues about roads and counting that, but here we'll just talk about Allen. If you calculate the 20% without that, they have met that with their protest letters, triggering a supermajority, meaning that they needed 6 votes to 1 to pass the temple application. So the final thing in the summary is because that vote didn't happen, it was 5-2. The lawsuit argues that the CUP, the conditional use permit put forward by the LDS Church, was invalidly approved. So again, this isn't about the temple, but this can affect the temple. And so I threw up a couple of these things, RFM. You can talk about these. This is the appeal itself, if you just want to briefly bring up anything that you noticed today on this. Oh, there he is.
I got my copy from you. Thank you so much.
He's got it. He's going through it.
There's a couple things. First off, I was okay with fractions in junior high, but this was still confusing to me because the 5-2 and the 75%, right? And you would think 5-2, isn't that more than 75? Well, it's not. It's just a little bit less than 75%, which means in order to have the supermajority required, you have to have 6-1. They didn't have that. That was one of the things I looked at. The second thing that I looked at was that, amazingly, as it so often seems to happen in situations like this, including those properties from Allen, was it? From the other town that's not Fairview?
Yeah.
Makes a difference. when you're trying to look and see if the people who are opposing, who are in that property range, 200 feet around the temple, adjoining and 200 feet, it's slightly less than 20%, 17.916%.
Yep. It's close.
If you include the red,
close.
if you include the red stuff, because the inclusion of extra property that shouldn't be included diminishes the percentage, right? So if you include it, you have 17.916%, which means it's less than 20%, which means you did not need a supermajority of vote at the city council. But if you don't include it, and I don't see why it should be included, it's another city. If you don't include it, then the protesting property owners becomes 21.274%. So it's over 20%. So this is a huge deal.
Huge. It is a huge deal. And what's interesting, what I learned when we interviewed the lawyer on Mormonish, I think we put that out on Saturday, is that the town itself, the mayor had said, you should file this because we want our procedures in the town to be correct. So it has nothing to do with the LDS temple. We want to do the right thing as a town. We want this to legally pass, or perhaps to have to start over, but we want to do it legally, everything up and above board, ducks in a row in the town, so that everybody can move forward and be comfortable with the decision. Because as it is now, you're going to have the people saying, yeah, that's not fair, and the other half will go, no, it seems fair. So they need some legal relief here.
And yet the mayor is telling the citizens they need to go forward and file this, because the mayor can't do it himself, because then he's acting contrary to the interests of the city who did vote this way based upon this understanding.
Exactly. And what the town council did do is they appointed, as I talked about last time, a lawyer for the zoning board, because don't forget, they're talking to the zoning board about, saying, is this legal? Everybody's trying to find out, is this legal? Is this right? We want to do the right thing. So, but yeah, it's a fascinating scenario. And again, they're calling it like a unicorn. It has never happened. It will never happen again, and until something like that does happen, you don't know that you have to, make sure your codes are written correctly, make sure things are calculated correctly. So it's a cautionary tale to any town, I think, who looks at this when the stakes are really high. So,
yes.
Yep. So I think if you don't have anything else, that's the lawyer, Mark Johnson. And again, everybody can go to fairviewunited.net to read more about this. And, you can donate to them, if you'd like to donate to what they're doing. Again, this is for the benefit of the whole town to figure this out so it can just be put to rest with finality. So